going to give you an introduction on the CSA 101 guide. It'll be short. Why do we need CSA first of all? So I think CSA stands at the nexus of three of the greatest challenges in the 21st century. The first challenge is the food security challenge, with nearly 1 billion people going hungry already, another 1 billion people to feed by 2030, and something like 14% more food needed per decade in the decades going ahead. Challenges relates to adapting to climate change, and I think there's no figure that epitomizes this challenge more than this one, looking at growing seasons in Africa. And this is under a much warmer world, using 14 climate models, looking at 2090. And the dark grey is greater than 20% loss in growing seasons. And as you can see, vast swathes of Africa are going to have to utterly transform their farming systems in order to adjust to such a climate. And there's almost no green on the map, so there's almost no areas where there's going to be a gain in growing season. The third challenge relates to emissions. So agriculture is not only going to be one of the sectors most impacted by climate change, it's also a sector which drives climate change. Up to 30% of global greenhouse gas emissions come from food systems. More emissions from food systems than, for example, the transport sector. So climate smart agriculture has to deal with these three challenges: the food security challenge, the adaptation challenge or the resilience challenge, and the mitigation challenge. I want to make it clear that our vision of climate smart agriculture is a broad vision. So it's dealing with crops, livestock, fishes, but it's not only dealing with the farm level, it's also dealing with the landscapes, the peatlands, the seascapes. It's dealing with forested parts of the landscape as well, and how agriculture interacts with those forests. It's not only the technologies, it's also the policy environment for making climate smart agriculture a reality. And it's also dealing with services like insurance, seasonal forecasts, extension services. And we see climate smart agriculture in a food system perspective. So we must also be thinking about the value chains, post-harvest losses, food loss and waste, and consumption issues. So why do we need a guide to CSA? Why do we need CSA 101? And I think there's three reasons. The first reason is
to all the initiatives that are happening at the moment on climate smart agriculture. This is one of them, the Alliance for CSA in Africa, and it includes a large number of players. And many of these players are asking a question, so what does CSA mean on the ground in a farmer's field? What do we have to do? There's the Global Alliance for Climate Smart Agriculture. There's many regional alliances, and here I've listed two of them, one from West Africa, one from Central America. And then there's a whole lot of countries which are putting up climate smart agricultural strategies. And if you go into the UNFCCC INDCs, there's 27 countries which mention climate smart agriculture. And the big question is, okay, we can talk about the concept, but now what do we have to do on the ground? The second reason relates to the three objectives of climate smart agriculture. This productivity one, or food security one, resilience, adaptation one, and the emissions one. And do we always want a win-win-win for all these three objectives? Which objectives and the weights of those objectives are really very context specific. So for example, in some farms, the key issue may be a productivity issue and a resilience issue. And perhaps in a landscape, one allows for greenhouse gas emissions to happen in a farming system, but making sure that forested parts of the landscape are protected. So therefore, it's not looking for a win-win-win on a particular farm or for a particular cropping system. And if you think about countries, And we take two extreme examples here. This is the greenhouse gas emissions from Malawi and the US from per capita. I mean, do we believe that Malawi should be putting a huge effort into greenhouse gas emission reduction from agriculture? No. And so in this particular case, the farming systems in Malawi, you may be wanting to focus on productivity and resilience issues, but we would argue even in a place like Malawi, we would like to put agricultural development on a different trajectory, where the future systems are not high emission systems. So the objectives are highly context specific, based on particular farmers, farming systems, countries. We need some guide how to prioritize what to do in these different countries and locations. And the other reason for needing a guide is there's much complexity behind the three objectives. So for the increased productivity objective, we're also wanting to talk about food and nutritional security. It must be productivity, not at the expense of the environment. And it must be a profitable system for particular farmers. On the resilience component, it's dealing with short-term risks, reducing the exposure through, for example, seasonal forecasting. It's enhancing the capacity to adapt and develop in the face of shocks. So these are the short-term and the longer-term, and there may be trade-offs between short-term actions and longer-term actions. And it's also about healthy ecosystems, given that resilience is partly dependent on ecosystem-based resources. And then under lower emissions, it may not be absolute greenhouse gas emission reductions. It may be lower emissions per unit calorie. It's also thinking about avoiding deforestation, so the whole boundary between agriculture and forests and how to deal with them. And it's not only about emissions, it's also taking carbon out of the system. So how to maneuver through this landscape of objectives. And this is partly why we have the CSA 101 guide. The third reason why we put up the guide is because of the context of specific farmers, the biophysical context, but also the socioeconomic context. It would be great to be able to say this technology is CSA and this technology is not CSA. We don't believe that's really feasible. Context is really important. And so Todd Rosenstock, for example, has says many practices, programs, and policies can be CSA somewhere, but none are likely to be CSA everywhere. So the tool, the guide, is meant to help us maneuver through particular contexts, both at farm level or at country level. I wanted to give one example of the importance of context, and this is alternate wetting and drying in rice. It's a different way of managing the rice system, and if you follow this system, you can get reduce the water consumption by up to 50%, greenhouse gas emissions also up to 50%, without compromising yield. And this is data for one particular system. This is the greenhouse gas emissions. The blue is the conventional rice production. The green is the AWD, alternate wetting and drying. And under this particular condition, we get a 42% reduction in greenhouse gases. So this looks like the ultimate CSA technology. However, if you use exactly the same technology in a different location on the landscape, you'll get a much lower reduction in greenhouse gases. And if you put AWD on rich organic soils, you may actually increase the greenhouse gas emissions, i.e. Every practice is really context specific. So the guide is partly to get us to understand the context and decide what to do in particular context. So what does the guide do, the website? It's an introduction to CSA for the beginners. It allows us to dig deeper into topics for the professionals. And it's based on a flow of information to implement in practice. We've got something called CSA Plan, which goes through a situation analysis, targeting and prioritizing, program support, and monitoring, evaluation, and learning. There's volumes of information already on CSA. The attempt by the website is to select and present the key information. So this is the front page of the website. I just wanted to reiterate that this is really a partnership between CCAFS and the World Bank. And there's a whole host of organizations, specialists who've given us insight and helped develop the website. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Bruce. Thanks very much, Bruce. That's great. We're going to turn over now to Olaf Westermann. Olaf is a senior consultant with CCAFS. He was the key person in driving for the development of the site. And Olaf is going to give us a guided tour of the website and give us an overview of some of the key features in there. So over to you, Olaf.
Thank you, Vanessa. Can you hear me? Okay, let me just... Okay, hello to everybody. And I want to start saying for me, it's a real pleasure to be able to present this website to so many of you. And also, as Bruce mentioned, I would like to say that this is the result of a solid collaboration between CCAF and the World Bank. And I would like to start by acknowledging the effort that a huge number of people have put into this. But let's get started. If you scroll down from this web page, from the welcome page and through the objective of the website, you will get to the content of the website, which has this really nice, simple and user-friendly interface. As you can see, the website is divided into 6 sections. The basics, which introduces CSA, followed by an entry point section, which features the main areas covered by CSA. This is followed by develop a plan, and then a finance section and a resource library. At the bottom, you can find a small globe where you have the possibility to get an overview of all the case studies presented at the website. And you can get into each of these sections by clicking on these subheaders or by scrolling down, and you will get to these real nice introductory pages, and you can click on those as well. Returning to the individual sections and beginning with the basic sections, this explains what CSA is, why it is important. It goes into the 3 goals of CSA and describe its key characteristics and how it helps to address a number of food security and climate change challenges. And it also pulls out the main differences between CSA and other sustainable agricultural approaches. I'll not here go so much into the details with the content, but rather highlight some of the great stuff and more innovative and useful features of the websites, such as the reference system and key resources. For example, if we go into what is climate smart agriculture, you scroll down and you find a reference that you would like to look further into, for example, Westermann 2012. If you hover over the reference number, you will get the details, the full details of the reference. If you click on the same number, it will take you to the bottom of the page, and there you can click on the reference and you will get an abstract which will help you to decide whether this publication is worth looking further into. We have gathered around 200 of such essential publication links and blogs on CSA, and all of them have abstracts. Similarly, if you go a bit up again and you stumble upon a keyword that you would like to examine further, for example, this one, adaptive capacity, you'll get an instant definition by hovering over the keyword. All of these definitions are listed in the resource library up here under a section called key terms. Beside these features, the basic sections has a subheading called reading and videos, which mention the most important introductory reading material, key websites, and also short videos that introduces CSA. Finally, I would like to mention that in the resource library we have a frequently asked question section where you can get the most basic information about CSA, but I will get back to that. Advancing to the entry points, this section presents a wide range of different topics or main areas of CSA, and to help navigate among those, we have divided them into three main sections, as you can see: practices, system approaches, and enabling environment. CSA practices here describes activities that take place mainly at the field or farm level, such as soil, crop, water, livestock, energy management, forestry and agroforestry, capture fisheries, and aquaculture. System approaches include landscape management and value chains, while the enabling environment mostly take place at higher policy and institutional levels and include index-based insurance, climate information services, infrastructure policy engagement, institutional arrangements, gender and social inclusion. Each of these entry points are structured in a similar way. And for example, if we take soil management, it includes a short and concise introduction, contribution to the three pillars of CSA: productivity, adaptation, and mitigation, key resources with abstracts, 3 case studies, and references for further reading. And we would like to highlight that the case studies are not an absolute list of practices, technologies, or tools, but rather examples of key ones. And the idea with these key resources that we have here is to guide users who already know the more generic stuff to publication that gives you an opportunity to quickly dig deeper into a specific topic of interest. Each case study includes something about the background, relationships to CSA, and also impact and lessons learned. And we believe that the case studies are really important because they are the best way to introduce what CSA really is. So we present 3 short and to the point case studies for each entry point. Continuing to develop a CSA plan. This is at the center of the website because it is a key component of the objective of putting CSA into practice. Develop a CSA plan is, as Bruce said, developed into 4 phases, and each is structured in the same way, with an introduction, scroll down menus that explains in more details the different steps, cases, tools, and references. For example, this situational analysis has 4 phases or steps, and it starts with an assessment, an analysis of the agricultural context, an assessment of climate impacts and vulnerabilities, identification and evaluation of current and promising CSA practices and services, identification of institutional and policy entry points, and assessment of financial entry points. As mentioned, each section has a range of tools, and if you click on one, for example, CSA Rapid appraisal. It will take you to a short description of the tool. And if you're further interested, you can click at the links at the bottom to get to the original source for further detail. The targeting and prioritization framework is divided into 4 phases, as you can see described here and visualized here. The first phase is initial assessment of CSA options. The second phase is identification of top options. Third phase is calculation of cost and benefits. And finally, the development of CSA portfolios and analysis of barriers. Here's also a range of tools, for example, climate smart agricultural prioritization tool, the mitigation optimization tool, and the ex-ante carbon balance tools, the last two both measuring greenhouse gas emissions. Program support advocates 5 principles of co-design: defining the content and end users, assessment of available information, innovation in product design, field testing, refinement and improvement of the material, and finally sharing the products. I'm not going into the tools here, just mention that many of these are still under development. Monitoring and evaluation uses a simple 3-step process to help determine which type of metrics, indicators and monitoring approaches are suitable for a given context. It puts particular emphasis on 3 different categories of relevant CSA indicators: readiness indicators, process and progress indicators. Example of these indicators for each of the 3 pillars of CSA can be found at the bottom of the text, and you can click into each one of these to get more details. And here we have tools as well, and some of those are still under development as well. Continuing to the finance section, it is divided into 2 components: a brief overview of funding resources and a list of funding opportunities. The overview gives a short description of funding sources like national climate funds, bilateral aid, the Green Climate Fund, GEF, etc. While the funding opportunities provides a more exhaustive, searchable list of funding opportunities. These funding opportunities are characterized according to focus area, sectors, and financing instrument. For example, if you are looking for mitigation related to RED and you are interested in a sustainable land management approach and mostly concerned about technical assistance, you can apply these filters and it will take you to this one fund, the Biocarbon Fund. Although the result of the search is this one fund, we should be careful to say that no other funds match those criteria, but this one explicitly mentions these features. And you can click on the fund and you will get a range of information, short and precise, on the fund. Moving to the resource library, here we have 6 sections. The reference sections, where we have gathered all the references, key resources, terms and questions in one place for a quick overview and easy access that can be used as a part of or independently of the other sections of the website. The reference section lists all publication links and blogs. The tools section have all the tools divided into their objective, what they measure and what they help to accomplish. Then we have the key terms, which explain the most important and frequently used terms related to CSA. The frequently asked question, as I mentioned, provide a rapid overview of the most common questions asked on CSA. It is divided into 6 headings. What define climate smart agriculture? Why do we need climate smart agriculture? What's new and different about climate smart agriculture? What benefits does climate smart agriculture bring over traditional approaches? And how does climate smart agriculture work in practice? We also have about this website where you can find more about the purpose and the authors and institutions who have contributed to the website. And finally, a contact section where you can get in contact, or you can with feedback, comments, and suggestions. Finally, we have, let's see if I can get to that. We have the case studies, which is one of my favorite features that I find really useful. This case study map, it displays all of the 43 case studies currently presented on the website. And the map will give you the opportunity to select case studies from countries or regions of interest, or you can go to the entry point filter down here, where you can search for cases within a specific topic. For example, if you click on gender and social inclusion, it will take you to East Africa and to India. And at the side over here, you will find a number of global case studies, of which one is highlighted, Climate Smart Villages, because it is related to the gender and social inclusion entry point. And finally, I would mention that the website has an overall search function, which you can use to search for any topic or word that you find of interest. And with this, I would give the word to Holger, who will give you examples of how the World Bank can use CSA 101 to design and implement CSA projects in practice.
Thank you very much, Olaf, for that excellent guide. We're just waiting for Holger to join us, so I would actually take this moment to invite the participants to use the question and answer tool to post any questions for immediate clarification based on Bruce and Olaf's presentations. So please do go ahead. I can already share one question that's been asked by Subhash Nataraja. He asks whether are these tools downloadable freely, and is it possible for anyone to use these? So I'll just give Bruce and Olaf the chance to respond if they wish to.
Okay, I can respond to that, I think. Well, all of the tools that we have, which are on the web page, you have links to their original sources, and the big majority of those are free. Some of them require some capacity building, and I think a few of them also you would need to pay for training, but most of them are free and can be downloaded from their original source.
Thanks very much. Okay, and now we've been joined by Holger from Washington, so I'm just going to make him presenter. Bear with us for a moment.
Good morning.
Good morning and welcome.
Thank you.
So I'll just ask you to turn on your webcam there. Okay, we can see your screen.
Let me start my webcam.
Great. Great, we see you. Please go ahead.
Here I am. Let me perhaps, it's fairly bright out there, which is good. So let me close my window a little bit. Makes it easier for all of you. Okay, I'm just joining you this moment because I'm coming out of actually a climate smart agriculture related meeting. So you want me to get going right away?
Yes, please jump in. We've had a lot of great background from Bruce and Olaf. So I believe you're going to tell us a little bit about how you and your colleagues plan to put this CSA guide into use, into action.
Absolutely. Let me start by thanking you for inviting me. My name is Holger Kray. I'm a lead agriculture economist at the World Bank, and I had the Africa Agriculture Policy Unit at the bank. Let me start perhaps by showing you something that I don't know whether Olaf showed it to you, and I don't know to which degree my camera can actually capture this. This to me is the most exciting aspect of this website. See, I mean, you've seen this. You might have seen it on your mobile phone, or you might have seen it on your desktop computer. But this is actually what excited me about this website, that it is being programmed in a way so that I can use it when I'm in the field, when I'm with a Minister of Agriculture, when I'm in a Ministry of Finance, when I'm with a provincial administration, or when I'm with a farmer in the field. And this will help me. The mobile solution and the mobile accessibility of this website will help me and many of my colleagues at the World Bank, and I assume also you, in using this as really the smart book around climate smart agriculture, irrespective of where we are. I want to focus on 3 matters with you this morning, or this afternoon, depending on where you are. First, I want to give you a little overview about what it is that the World Bank does at this point in time around climate smart agriculture. Second, I'll be talking about a real project experience, and I've selected a project from Latin America for you. And then I'll be talking for a moment about how the actual tools and resources from this website, from this 101 guidance, have been useful and will be useful in implementing these projects. So let me perhaps start by giving you a little overview. The World Bank is one of the most important international development financing institutions, but we do quite a bit more than just development finance. So it's not only the loans that we extend to our client countries, 139 by the way, but it's also the analytical and advisory activities that we conduct. And these quite often stand way before an actual financial engagement. Analytical and advisory services means that governments turn to us to seek our partnership in analyzing aspects related to pertinent policy challenges or in the preparation of policies. And how is that relevant for climate smart agriculture? See, we're just coming out of the spring meetings at the World Bank. We had 189 delegations here, and there was not a single delegation that did not raise the challenge of a changing global climate, and then the challenge this poses for agriculture more globally. So a discussion on how can policies be more climate informed is something that is basically our daily business at this point in time. And see, to many of the challenges that we see around, call it weather, call it climate, and agriculture, we might actually know what an appropriate agronomic response might be. But the question is, do we always know what incentives to put into place in order to actually have farmers, rural peasants, become more climate smart, respond to these incentives? I could give you a number of examples. Let me perhaps quote one of the examples from my very recent trip to Zambia. I visited Zambia, and Zambia has put into place a policy trying to support smallholder farmers by providing them with free fertilizer and free maize seed. And you drive through these landscapes, and indeed you see some of the most healthy corn, maize you will ever have seen. It's super tall, the cobs are very large, but the entire landscape has become a maize-only landscape just because of that policy scheme, that incentive. And we of course need to ask ourselves whether a landscape that consists only of maize continues to be a biodiverse and a climate resilient landscape. And so this is a very good example for where we need to and where we have to engage on designing policies so that they foster diversity. But I said I would want to go with you through one real life project, and I had a hard time selecting because we do so much in the climate smart agriculture domain. So I decided to go with you to Latin America. I might need a little technical guidance here on sharing my screen, show my application. Do you now see me or do you see the slides?
We see both. So you just need to pick your slide and go to click present.
Very good, very good. I'm constantly amazed. See, now you already saw my black and white picture. When I visited Paraguay for the first time in my life, I wanted to see two things. I wanted to see the Atlantic rainforest, and I wanted to see tropical soils. But what I actually saw was this. A landscape that was a soil-only landscape, completely without any landscape elements such as forests. And I didn't have to go to the soil because, as you might see on this picture, the soil came to me. This, for me, has become the penultimate picture of a non-diverse, non-climate smart landscape. See, this was not the only landscape I saw. I would visit smaller farmers and their manioc plantations. And what you would actually see are these, for all of us who are agronomically skilled, we see here a field with manioc that looks extremely, not well developing, extremely inhomogeneous, heterogeneous. And see on the right-hand side, the lady, she holds up a weed, and pay attention to this root. The root actually grows around the corner, and that's because of soil compaction. On the other hand, I visited some of the beneficiaries of a recent climate smart agriculture project that had been designed using the methods and analytics now combined in this CSA 101 guide. And look at these. I mean, it's a little unfair to compare one picture site to the other, but had you been with me in the field, you would have seen that difference. This is an intercropping site where manioc and sesame and corn is being intercropped. On the right upper hand side, you do see a fence of a rotational grazing system. This farm is not only like a more diverse and more resilient farm, but it's actually one that generates significantly more income. See here on the right, on the upper right hand side, you see what appears to be this brown crop in the field. These are actually remnants of a cover crop. A cover crop that's being planted between the various cultures, so to cover the soil and keep it more fluffy, protect it against erosion. And down there on the lower panel, you now see the villagers. They have moved away from just selling their manioc in bulk and produce products out of it, from animal feed over cakes, over other food preparations. And all this has made them more climate smart, because the climate smartness does not only happen in the field, it also happens on the farm in post-harvest processing. And now these ladies and gentlemen literally sell out of their product every single weekend. I'm showing this slide here just to allude to one fact, that we have sufficient evidence that in Paraguay, our sub-projects implemented by women are significantly more climate smart, significantly more resilient and diverse than projects that are implemented entirely by male beneficiaries. And we can go into that as part of the discussion. Let me move to the neighboring country, and here it gets really exciting. The example of Uruguay. Uruguay is a country that has been focusing on quality and conservation agriculture for a while. You see this ear of a cow here, animal registration system. Many countries have this, and Uruguay started it many years ago in the wake of a foot and mouth outbreak. But the country understood relatively quickly that having geo-referenced data, geolocation of cattle, and knowing where they are on in what type of habitat provides a unique avenue into an informed policy programming system. Nowadays, Uruguay runs, and they just launched it 2 weeks ago, a national information system that combines all different structural, agronomic, and market data from the rural space and helps with the programming of climate smart agriculture policies. See, many of the tools you'll find in the CSA 101 have basically been tested in this very laboratory in little Uruguay. The SNIA system that Uruguay has, you might want to Google it, SNIA Uruguay, SNIA, Sistema Nacional de Información Agropecuaria, has become a system into which more than 40 institutions share their data. It helps with the identification of vulnerabilities down to the municipal level. And it helps with the identification then of responses. The interesting fact here, look at the lower panel, you have these red dots, these red spots. These are the most vulnerable parts in the country. And now these are the parts of the country that would be served first and should an emergency response, a drought response, for instance, be needed. But these are not only identifications for response purposes, but they are for proactive purposes, which means that assistance to climate smartness, investment funds for farmers, investment grants are predominantly focused on those parts of the country. Part of it is also the soil use planning. If you go into the CSA 101, you find an extensive part on soils and soil management. Uruguay has taken the step that it has made it mandatory for farmers to to submit their production plans for the next 3 years. But we're not talking about a la Soviet type of production planning, but it's that farmers register their intent to produce on these fields, and then the state comes in and combines the intention to produce with information on soil quality mapping. And if you have the intention to monocrop soy, for instance, on a field that is prone to erosion, or otherwise not suited for monocropping, then the state will work with you. In this regard, Uruguay is the only country that I would know of across Latin America, Africa, and Asia that is currently accumulating soil fertility rather than just using it or depleting it. Two last examples, and then I switch this presentation back off. Uruguay uses this system for improved water resource protection. This is something that goes far beyond the agriculture circuit only. The diagnosis is that there's one watershed in the country where 90% of the population sources its drinking water, and now we are working with individual farmers that are identified with that climate smart information system to up their management of liquid waste, liquid manure. And finally, here you see an example of a traceability system that's being put in place for the application of pesticide use, real-time monitoring of pesticide use, which will be a first of its kind. I am trying to switch my presentation off here. So let me move to the final point that I wanted to make. Tools and resources. I would really see. I'm holding up my phone again because I actually prefer to access this website on my mobile phone, since I need it anyway in most of my business interactions. But if you go to the section on developing a CSA plan, and then actually move on down to the area situational analysis, targeting, prioritization, program support, monitoring, evaluation, and learning, I want to address 2 points before I close my intervention. The first, under situational analysis, I really recommend you take a look at the so-called CSA country profiles. This has become an initiative, a joint initiative by a number of institutions, where a homogeneous approach is being taken across a number of countries on measuring the climate smartness of agriculture policy and agriculture practices. And because it is a homogeneous approach, which means it is the same approach that's been taken to each and every country, you can all of a sudden benchmark countries and you can compare countries. And for those of you that are familiar with the doing business indicators, the doing business indicators of the World Bank have most probably inspired more ambition among countries than any other initiative that we did before, because now countries can show how they, or can see how they fare vis-a-vis their neighbors, their competitors. The CSA country profile exercise is such similar exercise, but it doesn't rank business environment, it ranks climate smartness. And it does that in an extremely smart, in a graphical way, and in a way that is verifiable and quantifiable, so measured. I strongly recommend this. We have done it in some 10+ countries in Latin America and are rolling it out throughout Africa at this point in time. But to me, among the methodologies here, it's one of the most interesting methodologies. Let me finally move to item 4, the monitoring, evaluation, and learning. I'm one of those that I know monitoring and evaluation quite often sounds like a pretty boring topic. In many projects, it's actually an afterthought. Oh, we need to add a couple of monitoring indicators. And thanks for showing that section on the screen at this point in time. But actually, in a number of countries, we have seen that if you start this well, if you sit down with the counterparts, these can be senior counterparts, and go through the intervention logic of a project, that this makes all the difference, both in programming the project, but also in later having the right indicators added for day-to-day monitoring, for larger impact monitoring, and for evaluation. Because quite frankly, many conversations with ministers of agriculture, ministers of finance, and so start around resilience, start around jobs in rural areas, around income, and about continuity in this. And continuity is quite often compromised by weather, by climate. I don't need to explain that to you. But by the time teams, organizations, NGOs then define their projects, and they might revert back to what they know to do best, either a value chain integration or community activation or so. And quite often the line of sight between the original objective and then the activities on the ground is being lost. What I like the emerging CSA 101 guide for, particularly in this area of monitoring evaluation, is that it provides all of us with tools that allow us to ensure this line of sight between objective and intervention. And quite frankly, aren't we all in a, let me call it a market without really meaning like the financial market, aren't we all in a market where we have to justify to our constituency how we use the public funds that go into projects, whether we are in science, whether we are in international financing organizations, whether we are in NGOs or in firms, and being able to enhance the narrative around climate smart agriculture, all the results of our interventions with quantitative information is only possible if we really attach the right approaches to measuring the CSA impact. And so, final sentence, little Uruguay has actually moved towards measuring the impact of its climate smart agriculture through a so-called climate sensitivity and resilience index. And they now measure what their policy does, not only down to the village level, they can measure it down to a couple of enterprise cluster levels. This is the first country approach, perhaps together with Ireland, where I've seen this happening. And so the country doesn't need to allege that it has made agriculture more climate smart or more resilient or less vulnerable. It can actually measure it and it can prove it. Let me close it here, and I'm happy to take questions on any of these.
Thank you so much, Holger. So what we're going to do now is open up the Q&A session. So if you just give us a moment to get everyone back on video here. There we go. Great, we've got everyone. We've been receiving numerous questions from the audience, some really, really great questions, some tricky ones as well. So I'll start with a slightly tricky one, and I'm going to give this to you, Bruce. This is a few questions combined into one. So the question is, what is the difference between permaculture, agroecology, conservation agriculture, and climate-smart agriculture? Can you give us the very succinct clarification on that?
Okay, I'll try. So for me, climate-smart agriculture is about 3 objectives: an adaptation objective, a food security objective, and an emissions objective. And that's the key to climate-smart agriculture. Underneath climate-smart agriculture, there can be a diversity of different approaches. So, for example, I would throw the question back to the person. Does permaculture deliver on those 3 outcomes under a specific context? And if it does, then it's definitely climate-smart agriculture for that particular context. So many of the concepts that you've asked me about are very specific to certain forms of agriculture. Climate-smart agriculture is not a form of agriculture. It's aimed at 3 objectives. And underneath it, you can have a diversity of different forms of agriculture. The big question is, do they make farmers more resilient? Do they reduce greenhouse gases? Are they good for food security and productivity? So that's how I would see the difference. I would also say that you can give me any form of agriculture, let's say conservation agriculture on granite sand soils. So if you give me any form of agriculture, I would also say I could find locations where they may not be climate smart or they may not be appropriate. Context is really important for farmers, for nations, and for whether we call something climate smart agriculture or not. Thanks, Vanessa.
Thanks very much, Bruce. All right, the next question comes from Mary Niasimi, and she wants to know, is the CSA prioritization tool gender responsive? Is that something you can respond to, Olaf?
Yes, thank you, Vanessa. Yes, it is, and as I think I also showed in the presentation, there is actually an entry point about gender and social inclusion. Of course, there is no one approach to inclusion of women and to gender in general related to CSA, but we clearly state on this website that exactly as Bruce says, for climate smart agriculture to be context specific, we need to find appropriate local solutions, and that means that you need to include stakeholders, different types of stakeholders, and that includes also women, of course. And if you look into the entry point, you will find 3 case studies on gender specifically, where gender has been included as a part of climate smart agricultural projects in the Shamba Shape Up, and also on the climate smart villages. Gender has there are examples how gender has been included systematically in a climate smart agricultural approach.
Thanks very much, Olaf. Okay, another question. I'm also paying attention to the time. We have 5 minutes left. We have a question from Mr. Akpadja. I'm going to direct this to Holger. And the question is, is there a place for family agriculture, smallholder farmer agriculture in the concept of CSA?
Absolutely, absolutely. As Bruce has been alluding to, context matters quite a bit. And actually, I think the family agriculture question is the perfect transition from the gender question into CSA. See, let me go back to gender just for 2 sentences. Gender is not only about male and female, but a gender discussion is also about the cell, the family that conducts agriculture. Family agriculture is described by many as perhaps more vulnerable to climate change and weather phenomena because of their typically lesser capital endowment, so they have a lesser resilience capacity. On the other hand, you quite often find that family agriculture is actually more climate smart in its conduct of agriculture, because it is usually the more diverse, more natural resource based and natural resource adapted form of agriculture.
Great, thank you very much. I think we have time for a couple more questions. So this is another question for Bruce. This comes from a participant in East Africa. Africa's diverse farming systems and socio-cultural practices pose a challenge to identifying, implementing, and scaling up CSA. So how do we overcome those challenges?
Yeah, it's a tough question. You know, I go with Holger as well. The CSA is really applicable to smallholder systems, family farms, and one has to. Our experience is that you have to work in a very participatory way, have options available for various stakeholders, and then it's up to the stakeholders themselves to decide what is feasible within their particular context. And that context relates to the biophysical condition and their resource endowments. So, you know, once again, it's not a case that you can just implement, as Holger said, a Soviet-style system of everybody's going to do X and Y. It really has to be bottom-up, and farmers are the ones who finally make the choices as to what is feasible for them.
Great, thanks very much. A final question. We've had quite a few participants who are wondering, perhaps conversely from the family farming or the smallholder farming question, is how does this apply to industrialized countries, to the European context? Does anybody want to comment on that?
I'm happy to comment on this one.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. See, the need for, I mean, it's blindingly obvious that we need climate smart agriculture solutions, not only for the adaptation side, but also for the mitigation side. Agriculture is a key emitter. All other sectors, infrastructure, energy, and so have found better solutions, have invented the electric car, and in agriculture we're still stagnant. If this trend continues, we'll be dominating the emissions matrix relatively soon. And that is a need both for family farming systems, but also for industrialized agriculture or more commercialized agriculture in developing countries and in industrialized countries. The Europeans have actually, I mean, there's a lot of criticism around the common agricultural policy of Europe, but it is one of those policies that has mainstreamed already climate considerations. Under both of its pillars, the market income and the rural development pillar, there is conditionality for farmers to treat their soil and the biodiversity and the water differently. And I think if we move out of Europe, particularly for the large-scale commodity agriculture producers, soy, maize, and so, we see how important it is these days to embark on production technologies that protect these 3 key natural resources, water, soil, and biodiversity, even better. There was the British newspaper, The Independent, just recently published a very brave prediction that said if commercial agriculture in Great Britain doesn't move towards more resource adapted agriculture, there are 100 harvests left in the soil. And I cannot support or neglect the findings of this study. I just leave it for your consideration and perhaps reading on the internet.
Thank you very much. So now we've reached the end of the hour, so it's time to close the webinar. I would first of all like to thank our experts for joining us today and for sharing their excellent insights. I'd also like to thank the audience, the attendees. You have been extremely engaged. We've received more questions than we can currently respond to, so we'll do our best to address those afterwards. Thanks also for the feedback that we've received so far. We are very keen to make sure that the site is useful for all of you. So please visit the site and provide feedback. We have a contact button where you can send us a message. I'll also be following up after today's webinar with a survey for those of you who wish to give more detailed feedback. So thank you again. Visit the site, www.csa.guide, and we look forward to hearing back from you soon. Okay, goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye.